2025, today with Dr. Poul Holm. Let me present you briefly. Dr. Poul Holm is the director of the Trinity Center for Environmental Humanities, member of the Royal Irish Academy Standing Committee for Archaeology, and vice chair of the Humanities class of Academia Europea. Paul's main research interest is North Atlantic fisheries, circa the years 1400 to 1700, and more generally the interdisciplinary combination of marine science and history. He has published on medieval and early modern marine environment, coastal communities, and maritime culture. A special interest area for him are the Viking settlements in Ireland. He served for 4 years as head of the Danish Research Council for the Humanities. In the years 2008-2009, he chaired the Humanities Committee, which is monitoring European trends in research in the socio-economic sciences and humanities for the European Union Directorate General for Research. Between 2015 and 2018, Paul served as president of the European Alliance of Social Sciences and Humanities. He is also a member of the editorial boards of several academic journals, such as Humanities, Mariner's Mirror, Global Environment, Journal of Marine and Arts and Cultures. He was a co-awardee of the prize for the best research of the year 2009 by Videnskab, a Danish science magazine, and was knighted by the Danish Queen for services to research in 2008. Paul has served as president of two international academic organizations, which are European Society for Environmental History, the Association for the History of the Northern Seas, and the European Consortium of Humanities Institutes and Centers. In 2015, he was elected a member of Academia Europea. So today, Dr. Paul is going to speak with us about the global fishing industry, modern food systems, how the blue humanities may inform citizens and management. So thank you very much to be here with us, and I will ask you to share your presentation. Here it is, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be invited to share my research, and especially on how the blue humanities may inform citizens and management. So the question of how do we reach out to the people who are really concerned by our findings. So my talk will really address two issues. First part will deal with how have humans impacted life below water. And the second one will be how history may inform communities and management. How can we translate historical data into actionable strategies? And how can we bring the long term into decisions about marine life? So that's the outline. And let me just go straight into it. And of course, the problem with water is that the human eye does not see what happens below water. So whereas the other talks in this series have dealt with stuff which we can see with our own eyes, or at least have a sense of what's happening. For life below water, before the age of scuba diving, our vision was very limited and impaired. And of course, we are limited also in terms of what are the historical sources, how can we access how things have changed below water. So for many, many years, historians and the wider humanities have really dealt with life below water in a very tangential way. That's changed in the last 20, 30 years quite dramatically, at the same time that the ocean crisis has really hit us. And with the ocean crisis, the most apparent thing is simply that the oceans will not yield more, will not provide more food for us. The wild catches of the oceans, as you can see in this graph, sort of plateaued just before 2000 in the mid 1990s, and since then have actually declined. Now, the statistics for how much food we are bringing out of the water are highly contested. The black line here is the official statistics produced by the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. The compiled list here is provided by the Canadian Sea Around Us project, which has investigated the fraud, the piracy, the unrecorded catches of the world's oceans, and this is their best estimate. So around 130 million tons dragged out of the water of marine life, declining now to some 110 million tons. So that's roughly where we are at. The oceans will not yield more. So in the future, as humans grow in terms of numbers, there will be less fish for all of us. But what is the long-term story? As you saw, the official data only go back to 1950, and even that at a stretch. Reliable data are very contested, even for the 1980s. But how can history and archaeology contribute? And are the historical data even worse than the published official data today? My contention is that actually, in many ways, the historical data are much more reliable as long as we are really clear about the regional perspective and the constraints on the data. So we have, in the last 25 years, first in the big global research project called History of Marine Animal Populations, and later on in a number of, especially ERC funded projects. The European Research Council has funded a number of major projects in this field. We have been able to combine experiments replicating the drying of fish, for example, with archaeological and documentary evidence. For example, from the Russian monasteries, which had amazing documentation of the northern Russian rivers. We have looked into the Caribbean and dug down these man-made reefs of queen conch shells dating to pre-Columbian times. We have had the North Sea Fishbone Archaeology Project has generated amazing results. And we have, of course, looked into the logbooks, for example, of American whalers, and been able to identify both the georeferenced positions of catches and identify the species caught. So all of this is now building up to a very complete sense of how much happened when humans struck the water. And let me just give you one example here. This is from Botany Bay off the city of Sydney in Australia. In the early 20th century, this was literally pristine waters. Very little indigenous fishing had taken place in this region. And when the Australian government in 1914 decided to launch a new fishing experiment, what they did was to go to Great Britain, buy two costly steam trawlers, have them sent out to Australia, at taxpayers' money, of course. And in order to make sure that they had a good sense of what was happening, there was meticulous recording of all the catches. So in 2000, in a spirit of absolute historical blindness, the decision was taken to just junk the archives. They were literally taken to the Sydney junkyard and left. Luckily, Neil Clare realized that this disaster had just happened. He went to the junkyard, picked up all these packs of archival material and used it for his PhD thesis in 2004. What he discovered based on this was he was literally able to document what happens when pristine waters are hit for the very first time by trawling. So the early catch results of the Botany Bay showed an abundance of flathead, this species, which was a delicatessen, realized to have the same meat quality as the haddock, which is used for the fish and chips industry in Britain. So it became enormously popular and eaten. And by the 1940s, the catches had declined quite substantially. And by the 1950s, the flathead had almost gone. Instead, the red line here, the redfish had taken over and dominated the catches. So what was happening here was a regime shift. One type of fish had dominated the ecosystem, the flathead. When it was fished out, the whole abundance of the ecosystem declined, and a new species, the redfish, took over. So this is a really striking example of the phenomenal impact of an industrialized fishing being launched in a pristine area. And of course, pristine areas, well, they don't exist anymore in most areas of the oceans, but we can imagine how they ought to look like. They should be looking like something like this, for example, when we're in northern waters, with the abundance of benthic life, lots of hiding places for marine life, which means that the little fishes are able to conceal themselves from the apex predators. And of course, this provides also a refuge for any kind of human fishing. However, once you trawl an area like this, basically you rip up the bottom of the ocean. This kind of benthic biota is simply lost, and we will be looking at wider implications, such as the loss, perhaps, of breeding grounds for the little fishes. But it's not just trawling that can completely change a benthic and marine environment. Here's an example from the northwestern part of Denmark. You see here, this would be where Copenhagen is situated. So we're in the western part of Zealand. And this is what it looked like in the mid-19th century. So vast areas here of little fjords, which provided abundant spaces for the nurturing of small fish. And in the course of the second half of the 19th century, much of this, all of that blue space here, was basically drained, turned into agriculture. So these habitats were lost, which of course may not seem enormous, but once you realize that this is the breeding grounds for the little fish that we would want to catch as big fish out in the open sea, then you realize this could have detrimental consequences. And in an agricultural country like Denmark, this is exactly what has happened in many places. There's been dikes to protect agricultural hinterlands, and areas have been turned from shallow fjords into areas where you are able to grow plenty of potatoes. But perhaps you might realize potato are not in short supply. So really what we are looking at is shifting from a marine biodiversity into a monocultured agricultural system. In many other areas, these losses of habitats have taken place. I move here to the west coast of Denmark, and this whole area of the Wadden Sea, which is, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage. It is the world's largest unbroken system of intertidal sand and mud flats, enormously productive in biological terms. In the last 100 years, diking has basically shifted the coastline on average of 5 kilometers into the sea, building up hard barriers to protect, of course, from floods, but the hard barriers also cause the gentle flow of waters into a much more rapid and turbid circulation of water with a lot of sand drift, which basically not only causes this hinterland to be lost as habitat, but also turns this entire mudflat into a much less productive area. And further out into the North Sea, the loss of landscape or waterscapes has happened well before modern documentation, really. Here's a map from Olsen's Piscatorial Atlas from 1880. And what he depicts here is these vast areas of oyster reefs all around the North Sea and into the Irish Sea here. And the bottom line is all of this landscape, this benthic biodiversity, was gone by the First World War. It happened really fast, and as a result of the onset of modern mechanized trawling, which basically eradicated all these natural reefs. Now, this caused, of course, the loss of European oyster, which became an endangered species. It also caused a tremendous impact on the coastlines, which became much more prone to flooding because the reefs out here were no longer able to break the waters, so you had a full onslaught onto the coastline, which of course was then met by diking. So you have a vicious circle of loss of biodiversity and loss of waterscapes. And of course, a loss of big animals. The sturgeon here caught in huge numbers as late as the 1880s. We have the statistics really well documented for the landings of sturgeon, which of course today you wouldn't associate with the North Sea or Europe. It would be sort of a Caspian Sea thing. But back in the 19th century, they were plentiful. But by 1914, literally, they had all gone. They had been fished out of European waters. So when we look at the causes for the loss of marine diversity, it is basically two things. It's the combination of exploitation and the loss of habitats. This is a study which is now 20 years old, Heikenlotz's survey of all the species and the causes of decline for everything from seaweeds to mammals in the marine environment. And what she found back then was that much of this, well, really the most important things had happened 100 years ago. And it was really associated with these two factors, whereas pollution, climate change, diseases, or the introduction of invasive species hardly mattered at all. Obviously, today, climate change will have a higher impact, but still, I would say, these are the two main factors in the marine environment. And as a rule of thumb, we have, at the global scale, lost 90% of the abundance of all the higher marine life in the last 120 years. This was the result of this large-scale research project, the Census of Marine Life, which was conducted between 2000 and 2010, which surveyed all the world's marine regions. And this is the breakdown here you can see by species. But overall, the take-home message is we have lost 90% of the abundance that used to be out there in the last 120 years. And much of the loss, by far the most important in terms of biodiversity, was lost well before modern scientific documentation. So we only have the historical documentation to really rely on. Now, this is uncontested. This has been replicated again and again, documented and modeled both by historians, by archaeologists, and by ecologists and marine biologists. This is the consensus reached, 90% of loss in the last 120 years. So to give an example of what happened even before the last 100 years, let me introduce you to my current research project, which which has focused really on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. The main species caught here, of course, the cod, which has attracted fishers from all over Europe and North America. Tens of thousands of people every year fishing for the cod through 500 years. This was, without any contest, the world's largest fishery for a single species. Enormously important for its economic value to humans, but of course also a tremendously important ecological area. And it was basically lost in the course of the last decades of the 20th century. By 1992, the Canadian government had to impose a moratorium on the fishery, basically prohibiting any kind of commercial activity in the area, which of course generated enormous losses at the human scale. Tens of thousands of fishers and plant workers in Newfoundland and in Europe lost their jobs as a result of this tremendous loss of economic and ecological resource. So the question, of course, at the time was, who is to blame? And a lot of people at the time said, well, it's really the Canadian government and it's the fisheries specialists who did not take heed of the increase of catches. And they really ought to have had a better management system in place. So the finger unequivocally pointed at the recent experience of increasing catches. And the data all seem to support this. However, I was not happy, and many other people were not happy with the kind of documentation. So this caused this was the reason for the funding by the European Research Council of the Norfish project, which brought together a team of historians and archaeologists to work on what actually happened and can we detect the scale of decline in the cod fishery. And what we came up with was a revised data set. So what you're looking at here, that's the old series, the red line. That's what informed all of the debate around the collapse of the cod stock. The blue line shows that the historical evidence documents that the fishing effort was at times 4 to 5 times higher than anything that had been realized before, and that already by the late 18th century, already by the 1760s, a level of catches had been attained, which was supported throughout the period right up to 1960. So for 200 years, a very large fishing effort took place. It was not a gentle increase. It was a steep increase that was then stable for 200 years. So what does this all mean? In order to make sense of a data series like this, you need multidisciplinary collaboration. You need to have historians, but you also need to have ecologists and statisticians who can make sense of all of this. So we've been working on this, and the result, which is not published yet, but is almost ready to go, shows that already by 1800, the catch of cod had reached the maximum sustainable yield. That's what informs any kind of catch quotas in modern day fisheries management. So already by the 1760s, you were looking at really taking out more than probably would have been healthy for the cod stock. Now that's hypothetical, of course, but once you begin to analyze what does this mean for the cod stock spawning biomass, so for all the mother fish, when does the amount of parents in the system begin to become critically endangered? This is the model that came out of this analysis, that already by the early 19th century, the stock size, the spawning stock of cod, was in steep decline and really only had a brief rebound in the early 20th century until it really was finally totally hit by the large-scale fishing. So what does this mean again? It basically means that we are looking at historical evidence that overfishing, over maximum sustainable yield, in the long run thinned out the cod stock in Newfoundland. And what we should be looking at is not just the final collapse, but we should look at the long trend of declining abundance of the stock. So this is quite a revelation. It certainly is something that raises real concern when the Canadian government only a few months ago issued a statement that they will now reopen the fishing for the cod stock in certain areas. It was based on a recovery of cod catches to 16,000 tons. But in historical terms, 16,000 tons is next to nothing relative to a sustained catch of around 300,000 through several hundred years. So we certainly can use historical evidence to cast doubt about the sanity of modern day fish management. It also raises our awareness that perhaps the impact of simple technology such as hook and line fishing can have enormous effects on fish stocks, even in pre-industrial times. Now, that is important, of course, for our whole understanding of when did the human footprint really begin to matter in the marine environment. Maybe we are looking at much longer term impacts. And this, of course, is stuff that can be replicated in many other regions. We are working on the Mediterranean at the moment, a very obvious example of probable human impact going back a long time. But how can we use this information to build ideas about ocean futures? Well, let me just say, looking at the Newfoundland cod catch again, this is the Newfoundland series, which I showed you before. This is where we get our cod today. So we don't get any cod from Newfoundland anymore. What we do get is cod from the Barents Sea. This is a new fishery that opened only in the 1930s. If we did not have the Barents Sea, we would simply not have the cod. The other regions you can see are really fished out in many ways. It certainly is a reminder that we need to be extremely careful going forward with the management of the Barents Sea. We have done what we would call serial depletion. We have moved from one fishing ground to another. The Barents Sea is what we have left. Unfortunately, it is also a very contested area between Norway and Russia, so it could be the victim of nasty politics in the future. History can inform us also of the extreme rapidity of how we are changing the oceans. When we look at the domestication of animals, obviously the Neolithic revolution and domestication of animals happened 10,000 years ago or so on land. In the aquatic environment, much of the domestication, that is aquaculture, has happened only in the last few decades. It is happening at a rapid scale and in many ways replicant, and this is of course a logarithmic scale, so 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. This rapidity means that we are experimenting at enormous rapidity, making all sorts of progress, but also all sorts of horrible experiments that can, for example, wipe out a whole stock of aquacultured salmon by sea lice, or it can release genetically modified fish into the open sea and totally disturbing the aquatic environment. So in many ways, what happened 10,000 years ago, and which we have had plenty of time to adjust to, including overcoming tuberculosis as a result of living too close to bovine animals is happening now in the watery environment, but with not much more care as to the long-term consequences. Finally, we can also look at how we can reconstruct the basic marine environment. Here we have had real breakthroughs in quite recent time. We published only last year a zooplankton index for the North Sea, which basically indicates that the productivity, everything in the sea depends, of course, on the productivity of phytoplankton, which is the food source for zooplankton, which is then the food source for fish larvae. So zooplankton absolutely critical for life in the oceans. Using a multitude of archaeological, ecological data series, we were able to model this long-term index for zooplankton in the North Sea. What we find here is that through the early modern age, from the late medieval period and into the 19th century, the aquatic environment was remarkably stable and highly productive. Unfortunately, in the 20s and into the 21st century, we have seen a terrible decline in ocean productivity, which is directly linked to climate change. So this means eventually that not only are we looking at a past which was abundant and which we overexploited, at the same time the actual feeding grounds have declined. So this is cause for concern, I would say. So it's not all doom and gloom, though. We certainly, when we look at the historical evidence, we can certainly say that the overall trajectory is one of degradation of marine habitats, of abundance of fish life, and generally marine life, mostly as a result of loss of habitats and overfishing. But there is also hope, because despite the fact that we have largely eradicated a lot of the hiding places for fish, there are still stones and reefs out there where fish can hide from the impact of trawling and predation by other species. And if we allow species some breathing space, there is actually potential for them to come back, to grow again. This is the positive turn on this, that history is not just a story of loss, it's also a potential information resource for communities and management who are looking to ways in which we can increase our food from the seas. At the moment, only 2% of human food is generated from the oceans. But as the human species increases in coming decades, we will likely have a tremendous increase in pressure on marine foods. And as we saw, the oceans will not yield more, so we need to shift the way in which we eat from the ocean. At the moment, we are basically eating the tigers of the ocean, whereas on land, in terrestrial ecosystems, we are eating most of our food from the bottom of the food chain. So we need to shift our pressure on the oceans downwards. And the beauty of this is that for every time we shift our foodstuff down one trophic level, we increase the production tenfold. there is a tenfold decrease every time we move up one ladder in this food chain. So every species eats 100%, 90% of that is wasted. Only 10% generates new energy, new muscle, new meat. So the lower down with the food chain we eat, the more food we can all have. Problem is, of course, will we want to eat marine plants? Will we want to eat the lower marine foodstuff? So this raises questions to the blue humanities, you might say. It is about how we perceive our food, how we understand the food resourcing, how we build recipes for our kitchens, etc. This is hugely challenging and needs the combination of dietary specialists and many other people, including probably historians. And we tried it out in what we call the Food Smart Dublin project. We tried to see, can we actually encourage people to shift their food practices? So Dublin has a rich UNESCO heritage site, the Dublin Bay, which is reasonably clean, but also neglected by modern Dubliners. The Irish people mainly eat Norwegian salmon or Barents Sea cod. They don't actually understand what is at their doorstep. This is part of a historical amnesia. When you visit Dublin, you will probably meet Molly Malone, the famous statue in the center of Dublin, and she's hawking, of course, the cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. So could we rediscover a more sustainable food culture by looking into the historical recipes? So this is what we tried to do, a collaboration of academics, biologists, historians, and sociologists with a restaurant chain headed by Niall Sabongi and schools in the wider Dublin area. So first, what we wanted to do was to look at the archives, find historical recipes, plenty of them, hundreds literally, that could then be taken to chefs in the restaurants. And they were challenged to reinterpret these recipes into something that would suit a modern palate. Obviously, a lot of the recipes were suitable to an 18th century, 19th century audience, but perhaps not a modern one. And they could be also very cumbersome. And can we even source this food stuff? So all of that needed experimentation. We called on participants to cook recipes and have their surveys. And much of this happened during COVID. So when we taught school children to cook, they actually were at home and they were taught online to cook the stuff. But we could bring the school children onto the beach and encourage them to also find seafood at lower trophic levels and see if this even could make its way into their diet. Eventually, Cordula and Agnese, the two postdocs working on this project, designed a cookbook, 1 year of Irish seafood, which is available for free. You can just Google it and you can download 12 historical recipes, complete with the historical information and the ecological implications of cooking this sort of food, and very good information about how you can actually source it and prepare your dinner. We, of course, also published an academic paper to document what we had done. So this is reaching out to communities. We also need to reach out to managers. And managers, of course, are a different kind of beast. They are informed very often by what they trust. And unfortunately, very often they only trust the most recent scientific evidence. We are providing evidence based on a compilation of historical evidence. So very often we need to overcome the problem of shifting the baseline of management, getting them to understand that if we continue to manage based on modern day information, we are basically managing a desert. If we want to rebuild the abundance of ocean life, we need to tap into the historical evidence. Fortunately, it is happening. In a number of cases worldwide, historical evidence has actually made its way into modern or current management plans for rebuilding the oceans. I was myself co-chairing the Food from the Oceans report, which was conducted by the Scientific Advice for Policy by the European Academies, SAPER, which eventually informed the legislation for the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. So historical evidence is making its way into management context, but it's slow going, of course. A lot of the challenge is to transform the biological and historical information into distinct data that can make their way into the types of georeferenced management systems that are required by authorities. So there's still a lot of translational work to be done, but huge potential for making history inform the future. So basically, we need to provide indicators for managers who are mostly concerned with their accountability. And we need to have narratives to reach out to communities which are much more concerned with their identities and, as I said, their food habits. So to conclude, I have tried to say that in a watery world, history has enormous potential. We can certainly improve our understanding of the past. This has happened in the last 2-3 decades. And this improved historical information provides baselines for management targets on abundance, distribution, diversity, and habitats. And crucially, the history may also empower people in their own choices as consumers and citizens. So with that, thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Poul Holm. It was very interesting. And so far, we have here 5 questions. The first one is, what are your suggestions in order to enlarge production areas regarding fish breeding?
Yeah, that's very important. And of course, I think that, again, the preferred action would be to, by most ecologists and people dealing with marine issues, is simply we need to step back. We need to give a break to marine life to try and reorganize and replenish. A very, very important step forward is the agreement by the United Nations on the 30 by 30 target. So by 2030, we should set aside 30% of the oceans as no-take zones. So basically try and see if we can limit our own greed and free up space for marine life. It depends, of course, on national governments to see if this actually will happen, but the ambition is noble.
Thank you. Well, this has to do also with the second question, but nevertheless, I will read it. In your opinion, what measures should be taken regarding overfishing?
Well, I would say that plenty of options here, and they are diverse. There's not one measure that will fit everyone. Clearly, fisheries, like anything, is a very complicated industry with all sorts of factors that come into place. Overall, I think it is important that we first realize how much has changed. And when I engage with fisheries managers and the advocates of fishermen's unions, I'm very often confronted with the statement that actually we're doing really well. Look at the last 10 years, everything is sort of balancing out. There's even a slight increase of plaice, for example, as one species in northern waters. My response is, but you are managing a desert. Look at what used to be there, even if you just go back 60 years, 70 years, we can document a tremendous loss of abundance, which also means economic loss. So I think we first need to agree on the facts. It may not be realistic to ask people to stop fishing from one day to the next, because then they will lose their livelihood. There needs to be contingency measures in place. There needs also perhaps to be a shift from one area of fishing to another that is less impacted, perhaps. But by and large, I would say if we want to rebuild the oceans, there's no way around it. It will come with a decline in fishing communities because we are overfishing at the moment, no matter where we look. So we need to have social cushions for these communities. And this will be hard, but there's no way around it.
Yes. Well, a third question, can you tell us more about the Four Oceans project?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is the project that I'm engaged with at the moment, and it is an ERC-funded synergy project. So the European Research Council funds projects that are fundamental research. So we ask questions not to inform management, but simply to improve our knowledge base. And the Four Oceans project is basically asking what has been the importance of the oceanic environment to human societies through the last 2,000 years. So we go back to Roman times in Europe, and we end our investigation with the introduction of modern industrialization, so the late 19th century. For that period, our knowledge at the moment is quite limited. There is enormous knowledge gains by simply bringing people together and asking, how much did we take out? What was the value to humans of this, and what was the ecological impact? And that, of course, is super ambitious questions that no single scholar could ever address. So that's the beauty of the European Research Council funding, that it actually enables us to, in this case, have some 50 people working together at a global scale to try and address these issues. So we are making real progress here, and we will report on the outcome by 2027. One of the main outcomes of our research will be a world atlas of marine exploitation, which we hope will be of real importance to school children, because they will be able to see how much has happened in the oceans. There's no resource for this at the moment, but we hope, of course, also that this will influence how we manage the oceans.
Yes, thank you very much. It seems to be a very important project. And from my part, I wish all the participants, all the members, the best success, because we are all in the same boat. We humans are all in this planet, and we must take care of the oceans individually. And this your project with your colleagues seems to be quite important. So another question, a fourth one: how can zooplankton can be increased?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Probably not by any human action. I would hope we would desist from taking any action. There's, of course, a lot of advocacy now for us trying to correct our ways, or to, I would say, meddle with the natural systems. I think basic problem is climate change. We need to reduce carbon emission. That will hopefully, in the long run, help also ocean health. We know that acidification of the oceans is a very important danger to coral reefs. And now that we realize that zooplankton is declining, I think there is absolutely a need for us to just be aware.
Mhm. Yeah, and this leads me to a comment. This is not a question, is a personal comment. I hope that politicians could be aware of this, because what's happening, I don't want to be too long, but this research all this presentation is very important, and it will be important that politicians could be more aware of this, and also society.
Well, we hope to reach out. We are not rushing to reach out, because we know that a lot of this will be quite controversial, and it's not controversial in the sense that it's building on dubious science or lack of historical data. On the contrary, the evidence base is very solid and vast, and it has been building up, as I said, for at least the last 3 decades, and is shared. So it's not that we're sitting on a lot of data that we haven't shared with the world. We're sharing the data in academic platforms, but once you raise your voice with this kind of information, you need to be absolutely sure that you have conducted the research to the best of your ability. So we will, of course, come with a policy briefing in 2027 when we conclude our work. But we are not rushing into making any kind of newsworthy action right now.
So we are about to finish our time, but I believe this is a last question. And what is the concept of blue humanities?
That's a good question, because I'm not a super fan of the blue humanities as a concept, because of course a blue ocean is a desert. You would want a green ocean with lots of phytoplankton. But unfortunately, blue humanities has been sort of propagated by many scholars and is seen as sort of an overarching nice catch-all for what we do and many others do. I think blue humanities includes not just history and archaeology, it's also including literary scholars, artists, a much broader reach than I indicated today. So there's it is a nice umbrella. Unfortunately, I need to just raise my finger and say, yeah, it should be green.
Okay. So we reached this time to close. I thank you very much again for this very. We could be here continuing to speak because these subjects are very interesting. Sorry, but thank you again, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you.